Okay, so today's agenda is to dive into nutrition more, get into more of the details. We're going to be talking about the main lab values that are referred to for heart disease. We're going to discuss the 5 main food groups. We're going to understand the 3 main categories out of those food groups that impact our heart health the most. And we're going to identify examples of good sources of those 3 nutrients. So we have a lot to cover today, and I just want to encourage you and remind you all to participate, come off of mute, share your thoughts, share your experiences. Go ahead and use the chat as well. And yeah, you all know the drill, so let's move forward. I also just want to remind you from our previous conversation in class 3, we talked about how mindset around food really matters and is the foundation to nutrition. If we have a negative mindset around food, learning about nutrition can become rule-based. And I think I remember I shared with you all that phrase, information, not rules. So as we dive into more details and information today, I just want you to remember it is information. You can use it to guide you, take what you need, leave what you don't. But it's also, I want to encourage you all to stay away from that rule-based mindset. And so yeah, just remembering this both and of all these statements here, nutrition changes can be small and impactful. They can be hard and feel good. So all of the above, just keep that in mind today. And again, these are questions that you can ask yourself to kind of bring in some of that mindfulness with food. How do I feel after eating this? Do I feel more energized after eating this? And actually, before I move forward, I want to check in. Did any of you try out using these mindfulness questions in between class? And if so, what was your experience? Did you come up with your own? Please share. I'd love to hear about it.
Hi, my name's Lysandra, and one thing that I do notice when I do eat protein, I can feel the fullness than just eating like let's say, let me use an example, like maybe just eating bread and not adding eggs to it. um I can feel a difference in my body where I still feel more hungry. Then when I do eat protein, I actually feel the fullness and it carries me out through like half of the day.
Yeah, what a cool observation, Lysandra. Yeah, just noticing how different foods that we eat make us feel. And that's such a powerful observation to notice. Like, okay, when I don't include protein, I get hungry really quickly. When I do include protein, I'm fuller for longer. And that probably saves you some time, makes your energy last. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Lysandra. Really cool. Does anyone else feel like sharing? Okay, I'll move forward. Okay, so I want to dive into the 3 main labs we focus on for heart health. Before I click to the next slide, what do you all know from your own experience? What labs are kind of looked at for heart health? Can anyone take a guess or share what they know?
I don't know, but I could take a guess. Um, Maybe white blood cells because I know that they're fighting infection. So I don't, yeah, there's just a
Yeah.
thought.
No,
Yeah.
that's a good train of thought, Lysandra. I like where you're thinking. That was like a complex guess, so I love that. It's not one of the focuses today. There's 3 big ones, But again, I like your thinking. Let's see. Um, yeah, Audrey said it, a CBC. So that's a panel that has a bunch of labs in it, totally. So these labs are found in this. And these are the three that I am referring to. So blood pressure, cholesterol, and triglycerides. So blood pressure is a vital, and then cholesterol and triglycerides are labs that you get taken through your blood. So let's kind of dive into what these are. So blood pressure is a measure of blood against the artery walls as it moves through the body. So it's measuring kind of how your blood is moving based on the amount of pressure there is. So it's measured by two numbers, your systolic and diastolic. And so those are those top and bottom numbers. The ideal range is 120 over 80. And so those are those two numbers, the systolic and the diastolic numbers. And so blood pressure is kind of measuring, yeah, like how quickly is your blood pumping through your veins, and that can tell us a lot about your heart health and how stressed you are, if you're feeling anxious, if you had a lot of caffeine. And it can change from different things. It can kind of change rapidly, unlike cholesterol and triglycerides. Those are kind of long-term measures. And so irregular blood pressure is also known as hypertension. And really, hypertension is a long-term, consistent long-term irregular readings of blood pressure. So if your blood pressure has kind of been off for a long time, that's what hypertension is. And so it's kind of defined as blood pressure that has been above 130 over 80 or higher for a long period of time. And so yeah, that's a typical vital that we get done. And then moving on to cholesterol. So cholesterol is actually measuring, we're actually measuring our blood. So this comes from an actual blood test when you're getting labs done. And so cholesterol is a waxy type of fat in your body that builds cells, makes vitamins and minerals, and makes our hormones. It's a contributor for our hormones. And it technically kind of is a hormone. I won't go too detailed there because it gets a little complex. But where does it come from? So it comes from our food, and then it comes from our liver. So our liver makes cholesterol. And there's two different types. There's HDL and LDL, and I'm going to share some tips on how to remember these, and we're going to dive into these a little bit more. So if this feels overwhelming, not to worry, we're going to spend some more time on it. But irregular cholesterol is also known as high cholesterol. And so with those two types, this is how you kind of know it's irregular. So HDL I nickname as happy cholesterol. It's the one we want to be higher, or higher HDL, however you want to remember it. And so if it's below like 60 or 50, we want it to be above those numbers. And so it's irregular if it's lower than those numbers. And then LDL, you can kind of remember it as like lame, like, okay, that's the one that we want to be lower because it's lame cholesterol. And so we want that typically to be under like 100 or 130 is kind of the goal. If it's over typically if it's over 100, we consider that high. And then we have triglycerides. So this is also fat, but it's kind of, it's different. So it's a type of fat found in our blood. So when you eat, your body converts any calories it's not using right away to triglycerides. And so they kind of act as storage or like backup in times of starvation. So if we ever, got dropped off on a deserted island and we had no food for days and days and days and days, we would rely on these fat stores that come from our triglycerides. And so, if what we don't want is for them to be too high because we only really need a certain amount of storage. And so when it becomes too high, our triglycerides become too high and it can lead to complications with our heart. And so that number is going to be over 150. We want to keep it below that because over that indicates something called hyperlipidemia or dyslipidemia. So hyperlipidemia is referring to high triglycerides. Dyslipidemia is referring to high triglycerides and high cholesterol. So kind of that combo there. Okay, so let's dive in deeper to these because I know they're quite complex. And again, if anyone wants these slides, feel free to email me after and I'd be happy to share them because I know this is a lot, or if you want the recording. And so, yeah, looking at our numbers for blood pressure, we have normal here as 120/80 or lower. Obviously, we don't want it too low because low blood pressure can be scary too, but this is our ideal range. When it starts to get slightly elevated, it's between 120 and 129, less than 80. Then as we start to get into that hypertensive range, we have stage 1 and stage 2. This is like actually that pre-hypertension range. And so those numbers are here, 130 to 139, between 80 and 89, or stage 2 is above 140, over 90. And then once we actually get to the hypertension rate, like you have hypertension, that's typically when you're having numbers above 180 and above 120. So these are just good to keep in mind. These are things you would talk about with your providers, and we can address this. It's not permanent. Actually, none of these lab values are permanent. So that is great news. We can do a lot to manage them and bring them down lower. Okay, and then I was gonna show this video on cholesterol and triglycerides. Let's see if it's gonna play the volume. Share sound. Can you all hear that?
Yes, I can hear it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cholesterol. It's essential to your well-being. But what do you really know about it? Let's start with the basics. What exactly is cholesterol? Well, it's a waxy, fat-like substance that's made in your liver and travels throughout your bloodstream. It's a key ingredient that your body needs to make new cells. But too much cholesterol can lead to serious problems, such as heart disease and stroke. Here's why. You see, there are actually two main types of cholesterol, LDL and HDL. LDL, or low-density lipoprotein, is sometimes called bad cholesterol because it can build up inside your arteries, which causes them to narrow, which can lead to heart disease or stroke. That's why you should try to keep your LDL low. Think of it this way, the L in LDL is for lower or lousy. On the other hand, HDL, or high-density lipoprotein, is the good kind of cholesterol. It carries LDL, the bad stuff, away from your arteries and back to your liver, where it's broken down and processed by your body. That's why you want your HDL to be higher. In this case, the H in HDL is for higher or healthy. There's actually a third component known as triglycerides, which plays a role in your cholesterol health. Triglycerides are the most common type of fat in your body, and their job is to store excess fat from your diet. Elevated triglycerides, along with low HDL and high LDL, can also increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, so it's important to keep your triglyceride levels low. For anyone who's had their cholesterol checked, it's only natural to focus on your cholesterol score or the actual numbers. But the numbers don't really tell the whole story about your health. That's why it's important to discuss all of your risk factors with your healthcare provider, including risk factors that you can change, like eating a healthy diet, getting plenty of physical activity, and quitting smoking. Controlling your cholesterol may be easier than you think, but it all starts with getting your cholesterol checked. It's a quick and easy test. So if you're due to have your levels checked, or if you never had them checked, make it a priority.
Okay. Great. I like that little video because it kind of breaks things down further, provides some more information there. Okay, so that was a lot. We went through a lot already. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so which cholesterol do we want to be higher? Who remembers from the video?
I'll take a guess. The triglycerides.
Yeah, so not the triglycerides. And triglycerides are separate from cholesterol. So we have
Okay.
HDL and LDL. Which one should be higher? Yes, HDL. Yes, perfect. So you can remember that as HDL equals higher or happy. So remember that H, we want to be higher, happy. And then which cholesterol do we want to be lower? Yes, LDL. So LDL, low or lame, we want it to be lower. So that's a little trick to remember the names. It helps me out all the time. Yeah. And who remembers how our triglycerides increase? How do they get higher? Remember, we don't want them to get higher, but how can they get higher? Oh yeah, Rachel said she's heard it as lousy. Yep, lousy, lame, low, it all works. So how do our triglycerides, how do they get higher? What causes that? Rachel said poor diet. Yes, definitely. And do we remember specifically what in the diet causes that? Rachel said things like creamer in coffee. It could be. So what causes that is when we're eating food that isn't being used in our body. So creamer in coffee could be being used in our body, it just depends. It's really when we're, eating, a lot of times it's when we're eating a lot of saturated fat, which we're going to talk about. We're going to break that down. But when we're having an imbalance of nutrients, so if we're eating a ton of carbs and our body only needs to use this many carbs and we're eating way past that, it's going to turn it into triglycerides and fat, and that's going to increase our numbers. If we're not moving a lot and burning through energy that is being used, if we're not using that energy because we're not moving our body, it could increase those numbers. And frequently overeating. So if we're eating past a comfortable level of fullness frequently, that could increase the numbers too. So just things to be aware of. So let's dive into some nutrition basics. So I like to focus on these 4 food groups. So carbs, protein, fat, and fiber. Are there any on here that any of us have never heard of before? Okay, sounds like we're all pretty familiar. Cool. So let's dive into carbs. So we have 2 different types of carbs. We have simple carbs and we have complex carbs. So our simple carbs are called simple because really their name says it all. There's not much to them. They're just straight up carbs. they go straight into our bloodstream. So they get absorbed into our bloodstream rapidly, very quickly, because there's really not much to them. They're just like zoop into our bloodstream. And so foods that are simple carbs are things like white bread and white pasta, pastries, sugar, candy, juice is typically a simple because, and these foods, again, they go straight into our bloodstream. And then we have our second type of carbs. These are complex carbohydrates. And why are they complex? They're complex because they are filled with fiber and they have a little more to their package. So unlike simple carbs that are just straight up simple, not much to them, complex carbs have more to them. They have an added benefit of fiber. And so we can think of these as whole grains or starches. So things like whole grain bread, wild rice or brown rice, oats, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, and then starchy foods like potatoes, corn, peas. Those are all going to be complex carbohydrates. And then in the middle, you'll see here, I don't have it labeled, but this is where fruit is, because fruit, it technically is a simple carb, but it has a little more to it. There's still fiber in it, not as much as some of the.
I totally forget about webinar. Got it.
We miss them all the time.
These is our.
Sorry, Beth.
Oh, no.
Okay, so fruit is in the middle because it's not quite a simple carb, but it has a little bit of fiber, but not as much as some of our whole grains. And I also forgot to put over here, our veggies are complex carbs too. So these are kind of the middle ground, the fruit is. And so but we have those two types, two categories. Yes, thank you for saying hi to No Problem About Being Late. Okay, and then actually, let me go back. Does anyone have any questions about carbs? No questions. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, protein. So we have so many different types of protein. I have a bunch of examples here, but what are some examples of protein that you all can think of? Please share.
Tofu?
Yes, tofu. Tofu is actually a really good source of high quality protein. So tofu's great. What else? I want to hear from you all. We've been a little more quiet today.
Chicken for sure, right?
Chicken.
Well, certain beans have protein,
Yep.
and I know like here in Gila River we have the capri beans, which are really high in protein.
Yes. Yes, most of our beans are really high in protein. And then Audrey said seafood, nut butter. Yep. Yes. So seafood, different types of fish, all different types of nuts and seeds. We have, red meat. So we have like beef or pork, beans, legumes, lentils, chicken, turkey, eggs. These are soybeans, but also tofu, tempeh, soy milk, all the renditions of soy. Bison, Rachel said, yep, totally. Cool. Oh, and eggs are on there too. I don't think I mentioned them. Okay, and then we have two different kinds of fats. So we have unsaturated fats and saturated fats. And those names, you know, they don't really roll off the tongue that best. So I kind of like to think of unsaturated fats as our more plant forward fats, saturated fats as our more animal-based fats. And so examples of unsaturated fats are going to be things like avocado, nuts and seeds, our fatty fishes like salmon and tuna, mackerel, um, olives, peanut butter, almond butter, sunflower seed butter, flax seeds, chia seeds, olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil. Those are all our plant-based, minus the seafood, but it's still an unsaturated fat. It's kind of the odd one out. Those are our plant-based fats, and we want more of these fats because these fats are really health promoting. They, they fight inflammation, they help lower our bad cholesterol and raise our HDL, happy, high cholesterol. We want more of these to do that. And then our saturated fats we can think of as animal-based fats. So these are going to be like fatty cuts of meats, which tend to be our red meats. You can get less fatty cuts of red meat. And I can support you in talking that through if you want. But typically red meats that are like cured, so like bacon, ham, bologna, sausage, and then yeah, just like pork and ham and beef kind of in general. But again, there are certain cuts that are a little bit leaner, and what that means is they just have less of this fat. Cheese and dairy products have this fat, butter, and then the odd one out for these fats is actually coconut. So things like coconut oil or just coconut itself is actually a saturated fat. Even though it's a plant-based fat, it's saturated. So it's kind of the odd one out. And so these saturated fats, we don't have to cut them out of our diet, but we want a little bit less of them. We don't want to eat more of them. We want to eat more of our plant-based fats, a little bit less of these, because these ones don't really have any health benefits to us. In fact, these ones can kind of clog our arteries and kind of shrink the so if you think of our arteries like this, if all we eat are saturated or animal-based fats, that artery gets smaller and smaller, and that's what our blood goes through. So it makes our blood have a harder time moving through our body, which is what raises our cholesterol, our triglycerides, and our blood pressure. So that's why we kind of want to limit these a little bit more and increase these, because these plant-based ones kind of fight that effect. They help support lowering all those numbers and getting them to a healthy range. These ones do the opposite. Any questions about fats? Okay. So let's talk about which areas we can focus on for heart health. So to start, the first focus is fiber. And so fiber is this really cool nutrient. It's usually found in our carbohydrate-based foods, but it's part of the complex carbohydrates, if we remember correctly. So like our whole grains, our veggies, some of our starchy foods have this added benefit of fiber. And so fiber is this nutrient that it doesn't get digested. And so because it doesn't get digested like the rest of our components of food, it slows everything down in our body, which is actually usually a really good thing. It helps support digestion, and it really improves our cholesterol levels and lowers our blood pressure. And how it does that, so I kind of think of fiber as these little like brooms that sweep out the like bad cholesterol, the lame cholesterol, and kind of like clean everything up in our body. And so you can think of you can think of fiber as kind of our colorful foods besides our whole grains. But we can identify those by, thinking of whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, oats, and then we can think of our colorful foods. So fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes. So think about on your plate, trying to get more color in there, you're most likely getting more fiber. And so if you are a numbers person, aiming for 20 to 30 grams per day in your diet can be really health promoting. Yeah, I encourage you all to try to get more color on your plate. That's the easiest way to think about it. And it's our best friend when it comes to heart health. We need it, and we'll feel better eating it. And then, okay, wait, sorry, I have a chat message. Yes, Joanna, it does help with blood sugar. Yep, it can help regulate and stabilize our blood sugar. It does that by, again, through slowing everything down. When we eat carbohydrates that have more to them, that have the fiber in them, it slows everything down and prevents our blood sugar from spiking. So you're totally spot on, Joanne. Okay, and then fats, we have two different types. Like I shared, we have our plant and animal-based fats. And who can remember which one we want more of? I know it says on the screen. Which one is our unsaturated?
Plant.
Yes, great job, Mina. Our plant-based fats, with the exception of fish. And also, I do still want to encourage dairy foods. Those can still, they have a mix of saturated and unsaturated and can still be health promoting, especially if we're opting for more low-fat dairy. And so what do fats do? They help keep us fuller for longer. So I like to use the example of, like, imagine eating a big bowl of salad with all the veggies in it, but there's no dressing. It's literally just straight up veggies. I would imagine, and I have experienced this where, okay, eat that, it's a large quantity of food, but then I'm hungry an hour later. And so why is that? Is because I didn't have a dressing on there. I didn't have a fat source, avocado, nuts, seeds. That's what helps keep us fuller for longer. So we can eat a large quantity of food and great foods, like fiber-rich foods, but if we don't have those healthy fats in there, we're gonna be hungry right away. And it's not gonna last us until our next snack or our next meal. And these fats are also really helpful for absorbing vitamins and minerals. So we have fat soluble vitamins. It's vitamins A, D, E, and K. Those vitamins need fat to be absorbed. If we're not eating any fat in our diet, those vitamins will not be absorbed, and we need those vitamins for so many different types of processes in our body. And then again, like I mentioned, these fats support our cholesterol. So when we eat plant-based fats, our HDL, our happy cholesterol, heightens, it rises, and our lame cholesterol or lousy lowers. And so that's what we want, and that's the benefit of eating these. They're also really supportive for our brain health and inflammation. And so again, examples can be dairy, so cow or goat's milk, and then all of our plant-based sources besides eggs and seafood. But yeah, canola oil, olive oil, cashews, nuts, seeds. I encourage these to be included with all of your meals in some ratio. And usually they are. We're cooking our veggies, our meats in some kind of oil, or we're eating fish for dinner, something like that. But just focusing on what type can be really supportive to our health. Any questions about fats?
I have one, Melissa. So is there really not a difference between like regular cow milk and almond milk?
So there is a difference for sure. Speaking of almond milk, so almond milk really doesn't have, because of the way it's processed, it kind of loses its fat content, it's healthy fats, and so it's kind of, it almost has like similar properties to water. Now, the kind we get in the store is fortified with vitamins and minerals, and so that part kind of becomes similar to dairy milk. But almond milk itself isn't very similar to dairy. And so if you're searching for a plant-based milk that compares to dairy, I would choose something like soy milk. That's the most comparable, has this basically same amount of protein, similar healthy fats in it, similar vitamins and minerals, and it kind of has the similar composition, like texture, I guess, creaminess as cow's milk, but lower fat dairy milk. It's actually really supportive to our health and in moderation, just like all foods. It has vitamins and minerals in there, vitamins A and D, and it has some healthy fats in there to help us feel fuller. Does that answer your question, Mina?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions about fat? Okay. So next, the last kind of focus for heart health that I'm gonna focus on is sodium. And so sodium is the, more fancy way of saying salt, basically. And so salt has a major effect on our blood pressure. When we eat really salty foods, especially for, over time, our blood pressure is way more likely to raise. A lot of times it does raise. It has to do with fluid and how it moves in our body, and we kind of get dehydrated. It's a whole process, but basically it makes our blood pressure rise. And so we want to try to limit salt. Salt is a flavoring in our foods. As we know, it makes food taste good. So limiting it altogether is not really like something we would recommend for most people, because we actually do need salt. It's an electrolyte. It keeps our heart pumping, but there's a threshold. We don't want to have none at all because we need it. And we also don't want to go over this limit. And so that number typically for most people is less than 2,400 milligrams. That's a good starting place for most people. And so what foods have salt in them? A lot of foods. And so sometimes it's kind of sneaky. You don't even think about the food that you're eating has salt in it. Most of our packaged food, that's kind of the biggest like contributor of salt, is packaged foods. So things like condiments, dressings, frozen foods, sometimes depending on what it is, not usually like veggies or things like that, but frozen packaged foods, yeah, you can kind of start there. Then our processed foods, so like processed meats, which I talked about earlier, like bacon, ham, bologna, things like that. Have a lot of salt. That's how they're used to process. And then fried foods, so like French fries or fried pickles or whatever you can fry, it's gonna have a lot of salt in it. And then another tip is if you buy the pre-mixed seasoning packets, a lot of times they add a lot of salt in there to keep it fresh. That's why it's in a lot of our foods, is to keep it fresh. And so just thinking about like your intake of packaged foods can be a good starting place, because a lot of times those foods are higher in salt. And again, thinking about that, we don't want to totally not eat salt too. It's just thinking about how can I limit it? Yes, Joanne, ramen noodles definitely have a lot of salt because they're a packaged food. That's part of the seasoning in there. And so that's a great example of a food that is high in salt. And yeah, again, condiments, uh, processed cheeses, processed meats. So just starting there with some of your packaged foods and saying like, could I make this myself? What could I swap this with? That's a good starting place to start lowering the salt. Um, but what does salt do? Salt makes food more appetizing, it adds flavor. But again, too much can make our blood pressure rise, which is why we want to limit it. Any questions about salt?
I have a question. What about Himalayan salt?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a good question that I get all the time. So no matter what salt you buy, it all has the same effect. It all acts as sodium and salt in the body. And really there's very negligible, like there's hardly any differences between salts. So use the one that you enjoy the most when you're seasoning foods. If you can tell a difference in taste, yeah, use whatever one you prefer, but they all provide the same amount of sodium. There's not one that's better for you than another. Great question though. Any other questions?
I have a question regarding salt. Like, I don't use a lot of salt, but I know there's salt in stuff that I eat.
Mhm.
But like sometimes I see in the grocery store where um it says plain salt and then I want to say iodized salt. Is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, so iodized salt is adding or it keeps iodine, which is a mineral, back in the salt. And so it's not a huge concern unless you're vegan or plant-based, because we're getting iodine and that mineral from a bunch of different foods. However, if you're more plant-based or vegan, you're more likely to be deficient in that. Everyone else doesn't really have to worry about it. So I would say get the one that you prefer, taste wise or cost wise. Unless you're vegan or plant-based, then I would try to get and cook with an iodized salt because you might be deficient in that. Great question.
Thank you.
Joanne asked about she said, what about salt substitutes? That's also a great question. So salt substitutes are kind of interesting. They're still minerals like sodium, however, or electrolytes like sodium. They're usually made out of potassium, so it's potassium chloride. And they're there to kind of mimic the taste of salt without acting like sodium. And so my thoughts on them are, if you're trying to cut back on salt, try them out. See how they taste in your food because it is a nice alternative to sodium. But some people don't love the taste, don't find that they have the same effect. And what I wouldn't do is if you heavily salt your foods, I wouldn't switch to this and heavily use that. I would just use it as a tool to start limiting salt overall. And I think just trying to limit salt overall is kind of your best bet. Yes, Audrey, it is better to use spices. Yeah, so when it comes to flavoring our foods, if we can move towards using more spices and herbs and getting used to that taste versus the taste of something that's super salty, eventually our taste buds can adapt, but it can take some time. And it's, yeah, really about just experimenting and getting used to that flavor. But that's a great tip. Yes, Rachel. So there are some medications where you can't use the potassium chloride, and it is typically like different heart related medications. And so that's a great point that I wouldn't try those out until you run it by your provider, because obviously I'm not all of your dietitians. I'm not seeing your charts. And so trying out things like that. It's not quite a supplement, but I would always, if you're taking any medications for your heart, I would always run it by your doctor. Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. So we just went through a ton of information, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, again, I will send you these slides. I will send the recording if you ask for both of them. And yeah, we're gonna, we have a whole nother class to go on nutrition. And so just know, like, this is a lot of information, but you got this, and it takes time to learn it. Going over it over and over again is how you learn it. But to help you learn it more, I want to kind of do an activity to test out our knowledge of what we just learned. And so I'm gonna go through some images, and I'm gonna have you guys pick which food either has higher fiber, is a healthier fat source, or has less sodium. So let's get into it. So which of these foods has higher fiber? Corn tortillas or flour tortillas?
The corn.
Yes, great. And do you know why? Who knows why?
There's plant fiber in it that's not overly processed.
Yeah, so this one is gonna have more fiber because it's a whole grain and a starch. Corn is a starch. And then this one is made out of white flour, which kind of has everything stripped out of it. There's not much to it. It's a simple carb. Yeah, they both can be plant-based. It depends on how they're made. But yeah, great job, everyone. Any questions about this? Okay. Which one of these is more of a healthy fat, a more health promoting fat? Yes, the oil. Do we remember which kinds of oils are more health promoting? Olive oil. What else?
Avocado oil.
Yes. Yes, perfect. Peanut, almond oil. Yeah, those ones we're not using in cooking as much. The, kind of more common are avocado oil, canola. And then what's the secret plant-based fat that actually is a saturated fat? Who remembers the tricky one?
Coconut oil.
Coconut oil.
Great job, everyone. It's our sneaky one. Yeah, awesome. Did anyone know that before? I remember learning that when I was in school, and I was like, but it's plants. I don't get it.
I know, I'm so disappointed.
Yeah, and that's not, again, Elaine, that's not to say don't ever eat this, food again. Don't ever eat this oil. It's just, if you have the option to cook with olive oil versus coconut oil for most of your meals, that's what I would do. But sometimes we need certain ingredients to make things good. Like if you're making like a plant-based pastry and like don't want to use butter, coconut oil can be great. I know what was I just thinking of? Oh, fry bread, like you can use coconut oil instead of butter if you're doing like a plant-based option. And that's totally fine. Like it's everything in moderation, right? Oh, Brittany, so coconut oil even though it's plant-based, it's a saturated fat, which are less healthy fats. Those are the ones that cause our cholesterol to raise and our triglycerides to raise. Yes, it's a sneaky one. And then Rachel, yeah, so coconut oil, it's still purposeful for so many other reasons, like our skin, hair. I'm trying to think what else.
My
There's
dog's nose.
Yeah, anything that's dry winter stuff, even for animals. Yes, so it can still be put to use and it can still be used in our food. Just, we want more of the other plant-based options. Okay, which deli meat has less sodium? This one's a little bit tricky. So this is salami, which is a cured meat. This is sliced, oven roasted. Yeah, turkey. Yes. Great job, everyone. Any questions about this? Which one would have less fat?
The turkey?
Yeah, great job, Lizandra, and everyone in the comments. You all know your stuff. You picked it up quick. I'm sure some of you already knew some of this, but that's great. Okay. Oh, Joanne said, what about spam? Yes. Spam would fall into the same category as these, cured meats. So they are gonna have, because it's a processed meat, it's processed with a lot of salt. It's also gonna have a lot of fat. There's saturated fat in it, that animal fat. So again, in moderation, like every now and then, totally, totally cool. But just switching to other protein options on a more regular basis is going to be more health promoting. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I just want to remind you, I've already kind of sprinkled this in here into last week's conversation, but I just want to remind you all that all foods fit. We're not here to create rules. Remember, this is all just information to help guide us to make empowered health choices. But all foods fit in moderation. Every food group matters. I never want you to walk away from here and go, I'm never eating fat again. Because remember, we need fats. We need all these foods. We just, need certain ones more than others. Some are more nutrient dense than others. And so that's really how I want you to think about it. Like some are more health promoting than others. And that doesn't mean we can't ever eat, spam, or we can't ever eat a packaged food. Like there is room for all of it. It's just using that information to best support us with our day-to-day choices. And so we can combine, I love this, we can combine our intuition. So what looks good, what tastes good, what sounds appealing and approachable with our nutrition knowledge and that information. So everything you just learned, you can combine the two to serve you best. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. I just want to remind you the goal of this course is total health promotion and making changes that are best for you as an individual and where you're at right now. Next week, we will continue our last lesson of nutrition, and then we'll have one more week. So we have 2 more weeks total. And yeah, I'm super looking forward to it. It's been so fun. I love the participation in this cohort. You all are amazing, and I just love hearing your responses and your input and questions. You asked such good questions, so thank you. I want to pause and see if there are any last minute questions. Oh, and also just reminding you, if you've missed any classes, please reach out to me because you can make those up. It can help support you in doing that so you can get your prizes at the end. And just make the most of the class as well. But yeah, any questions before I send you all off?